What are the common objects of our love? Those things that St. Augustine said bind a people into a nation. One thing, as we explore in the American Holidays series with JES scholar in residence Dr. Andrew Roth, is what people celebrate. And in this installment, we'll be looking at Christmas and New Year's Eve. Hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's digital programming. I'm Ben Speg and I'm the Vice President at the JES. In this episode, we'll explore the origins of how Americans celebrate Christmas by asking who were the first 5 people who created the American way of Christmas? Who was Sinterklaas? Who gave Rudolph his red nose? Oh, and is it Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas? And what is it about Auld Lang Syne one sings every December 31st? Answers to those questions are what we'll seek here with Dr. Roth as he continues his extension of The American Tapestry Project, exploring the common objects of our love and how Americans tell their story through the people, places, and things they celebrate. And in this episode, you'll hear some music along the way. It's important to note that the Jefferson Educational Society does not own the rights to any of these songs, but we're using various clips here for educational purposes that we're distributing for free to the community. Now, you may recognize Dr. Roth from his book note series published by the JES, or maybe his American Tapestry Project is both a radio program featured locally in Erie on WQLN Public Media and nationally on the NPR One app, and is a JES digital programming series. Now, in that programming series, you might recall that I've introduced him in the past. I've noted his accomplished career in academia, from lecturing to leading as he's taught various courses before going on to serve in various administrations in Erie and lead Notre Dame College in Cleveland as its president before retiring and being named president emeritus. Breaking free from that tightening grip of retirement, Dr. Roth heeded the call to serve as the interim president of St. Bonaventure University. Now, seeing his vulnerability when it comes to maintaining a relationship with retirement, we at the JES wrangled him in, where he's been serving as a scholar in residence ever since, offering numerous lectures, producing plenty of publications, and facilitating the Ramey Fellowship Program. For a fuller and much deserved bio, head over to our website, jeserie.org. Now, folks, since this program is first airing live on the JES's Facebook page, we'll work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, just leave it in the comments section below. If you're listening to or watching a later broadcast, streaming this program on demand, still send us your questions, your comments to keep this conversation going. And of course, for more information about upcoming JES programs and publications, visit our website, jeserie.org, and be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's my pleasure to welcome back Dr. Andrew Roth to the JES digital stage. Dr. Roth, thanks for being here.
Thank you for that introduction, Ben. It's always good to be with you. Well, actually, as we look at the schedule that the American Holiday Series had, this is actually the end. We started a year ago with 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, a bit of which is included in this program. But over the course of the year, we've done what we call the American Holiday Series. We started back in February, which it turns out, and I think we're going to do a version of that program on February 2nd when the Jefferson returns to face-to-face programming. But it turns out, I think I'm going to call that program on February 2nd, Festive February, a month of holidays. You tend to think of February as a kind of gloomy month, but you have Candlemas, Groundhog, Super Bowls, Valentine's Day, and President's Day all jammed into 28 days. And we follow that up with ethnic holidays, commercial holidays, the most famous of which is Mother's Day, celebrating freedom. We did sporting holidays this fall. Just last month, we did Halloween and Thanksgiving. And today, we're going to end at least the first pass at this series with Christmas, a brief history. And the background on this and how this fits into other programming we've been doing that Ben highlighted, as Ben said, I've been working on a program I call the American Tapestry Project, since at least 2018 when I started with, I think, America in 1968. And then we've been looking at the American story. Our politics has become, sadly, politics all the time. Nobody ever comes up for air anymore. And that politics doesn't tend to pivot on crucial policy issues, but it seems to be culture wars all the time. And the American Tapestry Project looks at that because what are the culture wars but arguments about whose story is the American story and what it means to be an American. And you can find, I think I've now done 17 episodes for QLN, and you can find that on their website and other podcast sites. And as I mentioned, we've been doing this at the Jefferson Society. The American Holidays is an outgrowth of that because one of the things Americans, in fact, do hold in common, and for the most part, share in common and don't fight too much about are the holidays they celebrate. Now that's, there are some contentious issues, not the least of which will be today's program. Is it Merry Christmas or is it Happy Holidays? And we know there have been people talking about the war on Christmas. And this is probably as good a place as any to maybe make a comment or two about that. I think you're going to discover that Christmas has always been a dual, D-U-A-L, dual holiday. It's obviously a religious feast day for those of the Christian persuasion, but it has also been from the beginning a midwinter festival celebrating life and celebrating good cheer, family, celebrating the renewal and hope for the future. And we're going to see that. And so it's always done both things. So my answer to the question, is it Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays? It's both. It's Merry Christmas and it's Happy Holidays. And in some way, we're going to discover the Happy Holidays has transcended the Merry Christmas because Christmas wasn't always observed. But we'll get into that as we go along. While on all of the episodes, we've looked at this chart about American holidays ranked by consumer spending, and Christmas and Thanksgiving just dwarf all the others. Tucked behind Ben and I's head, or my head, I think I'm the only one at the moment who sees Ben, it says $999.97 per capita Americans will spend. Well, if you round that up to 1,000 and multiply it times 330 million people, you get a very big number. It dwarfs 5 times as much as spent on Christmas and Thanksgiving as Mother's Day, and down here to St. Patrick's Day, it's almost by a factor of 25 to 1. And of that, and round numbers, $1,000 that Americans spend on Christmas and Thanksgiving, 80% or 800 of those dollars is spent on Christmas. It's probably actually closer to 850 of those dollars is spent on Christmas, because while there are Thanksgiving decorations, Thanksgiving expenditures are primarily, as we all know, food. So we're going to look at Christmas today, the #1 holiday in America by consumer spending, if that's what the marker you want, but also the #1 holiday in America just by the amount of people who in some manner, shape, or form recognize it, celebrate it, honor it, enjoy it. As we get into this program today, I want to make a disclaimer early on. This is not a history of all of Christmas. This is a history of sort, in many ways, an introduction to a history of what I call the American way of Christmas. The entire history of Christmas is really beyond our scope, beyond what we could do in a simple hour. But one way of getting at that is to ask the question, why December 25th for Christmas? Why is Christmas celebrated on December 25th? And you will discover that the answer to that is actually fairly complicated. And again, as I said, it's beyond the scope of this. And I would recommend, well, for those of you who really want to delve into it, you can get the Oxford Handbook of Christmas and go through all 1,500 pages. Or you can read a marvelous little book of about 150 pages by Joseph Kelly, Joe Kelly, who is a professor, interestingly enough, at my alma mater, John Carroll University in Cleveland. Dr. Kelly, Joe wrote a small volume in which he talks about the origins of Christmas, and he does an excellent job for the non-theologian of explaining the theological background of how we arrive at Christmas and how we arrive at December 25th as the date for Christmas. As Joe points out in his book, Christmas is not mentioned in Scripture. It's actually called the infancy narratives by theologians, and those are only found in the Gospel of St. Matthew and the Gospel of Luke. And while they are essentially in agreement, they disagree on certain key ideas and certain key items. And Dr. Kelly goes at great length in explaining all of those nuances. The only thing I'm going to touch on ever so briefly, and then we're going to get into the American way of Christmas, is exactly why we celebrate it on December 25th. As I said, there is in Scripture no accounting for that, and you will not find the word Christmas used. Christmas actually is an anglicization of Christ's Mass, which comes from the 3rd or 4th century, when the Feast of the Nativity, which is also not mentioned in Scripture, began to be celebrated. We arrive at December 25th because the earliest Christians, the very earliest Christians, weren't much interested in Christmas or Christ's nativity. They thought the world was going to come to an end almost immediately. When it didn't come to an end almost immediately, they had to begin to pivot. And in the 2nd and 3rd century, they became interested not only obviously in the resurrection, without which you don't have anything, but they also began to be interested in the beginning, in Christ's birth or the arrival of the Messiah. And while that was going on, there was also a beginning of interest in the Blessed Virgin Mary. And they began to wonder about, the message from the Archangel Gabriel when she was, it's called the Annunciation of Mary. And that got tied up with a couple of interesting things that we've touched on in the past. Springtime and the renewal and the rebirth. And to the best that Scripture would point out, and I, again, don't want to spend a lot of time on this because this isn't my topic, but to the extent Scripture even suggests a date, it does suggest springtime. You do not go on the road, do not leave home and journey across country in the middle of the winter in the first millennium. So the Annunciation must have occurred at springtime. The early church was dominated, obviously, by both Romans and in the Christian Asia Minor, and that landed on something around what would have been the vernal equinox. And so, as we all know, and Joe Kelly does a wonderful job of explaining this, the Annunciation of Mary, the date is the Feast of the Annunciation of Mary in the Catholic tradition is March 25th. Okay, 9 months later is December 25th. That's how you get to, one of the ways you get to December 25th. It also has to do, and this takes us actually back to Christmas, the Epiphany, which was the presentation of Jesus when the Magi from the east appear. That's in Luke, not Matthew. That seems to have been, depending on if you say it's December 25th, within 6 or 7 days, and you land on January 6th, etc., which is Epiphany. And of course, January 5th becomes 12th night. And as we'll hear when we talk about festive February, the purification of Mary is on February 2nd, Candlemas, and that is when Jesus was presented also at the temple. And so all of that combines with one other thing. That December 25th date created a problem in the early church in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, because the Roman Empire was still in full swing. And the major holiday in the Roman Empire, we're going to discover, was the Saturnalia. And this ties in, this is a slide you've seen in some other of the programs. There was this major Roman holiday that had to somehow be dealt with, that also occurred around December 25th. And one of the things we've learned through all of these holidays is what is called the Christianization of pagan holidays. And we discovered that St. Valentine's Day occurs on February 14th, because that was the day of the Roman festival of the Lupercalia. We discovered that Easter, which also does not appear in Scripture, is really named after the Norse goddess of the west wind, Eostra, whose symbols were chickens and eggs and rabbits, because she was the symbol of fertility. That becomes Easter. I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about why you wear your wedding ring on the 4th finger of your left hand. I'll just simply say that is another custom that comes out of antiquity. And very, very quickly, the ancient Greeks believed there was a vein, the amorous venus, that ran from that finger up your arm to your heart. They believed the heart was the seat of emotions, and that's why you wear a wedding ring on that finger. And then what ties into all of this, we learned in Halloween about the Celtic celebration of Samhain, and of course the Roman Saturnalia, the ancient customs, and that was the Christianization. And the Roman Saturnalia was a midwinter festival that occurred around the winter solstice. And in the Julian, not the Gregorian calendar, in the Julian calendar, the winter solstice occurred on December 25th, not December 21st. And the Saturnalia was a festival or a feast celebrating Saturn, the god of the, and Sol Invictus, the god of the king, the goddess of the sun. And what you see here is the temple of Saturn over on the right, on the right of the screen where my cursor is at the moment. That's the rooms as they look today. over on the left is obviously an artistic recreation of what they are thought to have looked at the height of the Roman Empire. And of course, that was a midwinter festival celebrating and honoring the god of the sun, Saturn, Sol Invictus. And it was celebrated by feasting, partying, gift giving, and general revelry. And and all of these are late antiquity images of Saturnalia. But one of the things that's interesting, you'll notice in this painting where the cursor is now, one of the decorations was evergreens. And why evergreens? Because evergreens are evergreen and the symbol of life. And so with the attempt to establish Christianity as the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, something needed to be done to co-opt the Saturnalia, and that occurred circa 350 CE in the 4th century when Pope Julius I created the Feast of the Nativity, which is distinct from the infancy narratives. The Feast of the Nativity was the celebration of the birth of the Christ on December 25th. And so it's a day that somewhat is arbitrarily arrived at. And for the earliest part of Christian history through the first millennium until you get into the late Middle Ages, it was in fact a religious holiday. But that began to change as the Christianity spread north and northwest, and it had to deal with the winter celebrations, the solstice celebrations of the Nordic people, so that it was converting. That's beyond the scope of what we want to talk about, but that is a kind of very brief, and I emphasize brief, and I admittedly somewhat superficial explanation of how we land on the date December 25th. What we're interested in is flash forwarding another millennium and a half from the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. I'm going to use old nomenclature, the 1st century AD, to roughly the 17th century when Christmas comes to America. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how did that happen? Jack Frost nipping at your nose. May have turned that music down a little too low. That was Nat King Cole with the famous Christmas song. In any event, Christmas comes to America with the first Anglo settlers and the Dutch in New York, and obviously in Florida, the Spanish settlers, but we're primarily interested with what happened in the colonies that become ultimately the United States. Christmas in colonial America. In New England, the Puritans actually banned Christmas. They did not celebrate Christmas. They thought the revelry and feasting to be at best blasphemous and at worst a popish, i.e. Catholic horror. And William Bradford in his notes and letters talks about that. They were quite comfortable with quiet celebrations at home, but they did not believe in public celebrations of it, much less feasting and gift giving. And in fact, in 1659, the Massachusetts General Court, which the odd nomenclature, the Massachusetts state legislature is still called the General Court. It's not a court of law, it's actually the state assembly. It banned and outlawed Christmas and imposed a 5-shilling fine on anyone who was caught idling at work or away from work or out in celebrating. As we look down the coast, the Atlantic coast of the colonies, so Christmas was actually banned or shunned in New England. In the Dutch colonies, or the colonies that were originally Dutch in New York, as we're going to discover, it was in fact celebrated, and you will find out about Sinterklaas and his wagon and his horse, and that was celebrated with mixed opinions. And in Pennsylvania and the Jerseys, the Middle Atlantic colonies, it tended to be ignored because of the very large Quaker presence. But in the in the Catholic colony of Maryland and in the Anglican colonies of Virginia and the Carolinas, Christmas was celebrated much as it was in the south of England. It was celebrated with feasting, nominal church attendance, feasting. These are obviously photographs and recreations from colonial Williamsburg, but it was celebrated with feasting, dancing and revelry, interestingly enough, gambling and horse racing. And it was a midwinter festival, not a religious holiday as such, although there was a token nod to that. Well, tying all of that into our American holidays, one of the things we're going to discover that the American way of Christmas Well, it would be a bit of an overstatement to say it was created, because it happened kind of organically. It was being celebrated, as we said, hit and miss in New England, hit and miss in New York and the Dutch colonies, somewhat ignored in the Middle Atlantic colonies, and celebrated in the Southern colonies, Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas. In the early American culture, after the American Revolution, in the late 18th, early 19th century, there really weren't a lot of American holidays, as we've learned. The major American holiday, to the extent there was a national holiday, would have been the 4th of July. New Year's Day was celebrated to a limited extent. Valentine's Day by the 1830s, 1840s has become the major gift-giving day. And Washington's birthday, for a large part of that time, was probably the second major American holiday. Thanksgiving was, as we learned last month, a regional holiday, primarily celebrated in New England, although there were versions of it elsewhere, but it was not yet a national holiday. And of course, as we've just discovered, Christmas was celebrated erratically and rarely as a purely religious holiday. And that's an important point. Rarely as a purely religious holiday. It was really a time of midwinter celebration. Well, the newly formed United States of America in the late 18th, early 19th, particularly in the early 19th century, there was thought to be the need to create a common culture. And the foundation of that culture is something I call home and national unity. Richard D. White, in a marvelous book, The History of the United States in the 19th Century, called In the Republic for Which It Stands, talks about how there was this notion to try to stabilize a frontier society, a society that was revolutionary, a society that was constantly reinventing itself as it pushed westward. There was the need to create some kind of notion of stability and to anchor it. And that anchoring landed in the early 19th century creation of the notion of home, which home, everything, just think of all of the things you associate with that expression, home, sweet home. Home, the hearth. And it was really a gendered thing in which women ran the home and they were the custodians of the home. And the father was the one who went out and earned. It's actually the prototype or the genesis of what 20th century sociologists would have called the nuclear family. But that was thought of as the rock upon which they would build this culture. And you find expressions of that in the holidays. How does that tie into Christmas? Well, that ties into Christmas with all the earlier images. If you think of Currier and Ives Christmas, the town square, home, as I got the cursor there, the people arriving for Christmas. And they created this notion of Christmas as a homebound holiday. It was a holiday that was celebrated at home, and it was a holiday that you'll see in all of these images, which date from the 19th century. None of them are religious. It is a holiday of family. It is a holiday celebrating unity. And it gives rise then to, it's one of the very first American holidays. And I want to be careful not to make it sound like somebody sat down and thought this all out in advance. It happened organically, but it was also orchestrated. Let's take a look at some of the ways in which it happened organically. And there's a Christmas tree. I meant to put that slide up earlier. Well, Christmas tree is a good transition. One of the first ways in which it began to be a home holiday, a holiday celebrated at home, was in fact
Old Tannenbaum, Old Tannenbaum,
was in fact Christmas trees. Now, remember on that one slide I showed of the Roman Saturnalia, which I've got a little clip from it up here, and the evergreens. It was also, and I talked about how as Christianity spread north, it adapted or adopted some of the customs of the Nordics. And the Druids always celebrated their religious services in oak groves, under trees, under hemlock trees, and other trees that remained green throughout the year. The Christmas tree obviously is a German notion. The myth is that Martin Luther, that is a portrait of Martin Luther, was the one who first put candles on the Christmas tree. And I want to point out in this early example here, notice that the Christmas tree is a small tree on a tabletop. This notion was first brought to America by a professor of German and a professor of theology at Harvard, Karl Fohlen, in 1835, who Maria Martineau, a sociologist, has documented this. Fohlen probably had the very first Christmas tree in a house in America. And he brought the German custom of the Christmas tree to America. And again, this 19th century painting shows you what that would have looked like. And of course, it's on a table. It's a small tree. And of course, with that, you have the beginning of decorations, which were earlier dried fruits and handcrafted things. Eventually, they become more ornate, commercially prepared or commercially created decorations as the season wore on. Well, that then became, Americans adopted that German custom and turned it into an American custom. And as Americans are wont to do, the tree left the table and
oh, Christmas tree, oh, Christmas tree.
If you're going to have a Christmas tree, we're going to have a tree. We're not going to have a bush on a table, so to speak. And you end up where we are today, this wonderful Norman Rockwell portrait of putting the tree up on the town common, the White House Christmas tree, which is over here, Rockefeller Center, all of these things. So one of the very first things was Christmas trees in the home. And it's important that it was in the home, and it's important that it was not necessarily a religious symbol. The symbol is a symbol of light in winter. It's a symbol of life in winter because it's green. That's why the colors of Christmas, by the way, looking up here at that heading, Christmas trees, they're red and green. They're green because of the evergreen, and that is ancient. It comes all the way down. I'll explain why they're red in a moment. Another thing that began to happen organically was Christmas cards. The very first Christmas card is this one in the upper, as you're looking at it, the upper left-hand corner of the screen, and it's an English card in 1843, Henry Cole. First American card is this one down in the lower left-hand corner, dates from roughly the 1840s in Albany, New York, R.H. Peace and Company. But the beginning of the American Christmas card is over here to the right of the screen. Louis Prang of Boston in 1857 saw these cards on a trip to Vienna. He was in Europe and brought the tradition of Christmas cards. And they were cards akin to what we would call a postcard. They were cards. And he brought that tradition to America and began the first American Christmas cards. And these are all Louis Prang Christmas cards. And if you have one of these, you have a valuable artifact. But the first American Christmas card that folded over and was put into an envelope is actually relatively recent. Everything's relative. It was 100 years ago, but was in 1911 when Joyce Hall, the founder of Hallmark, because people complained there wasn't enough room on the back of the card to write all they wanted to write about Christmas sentiments to whomever they were sending cards. So he created a double folded card that you put in an envelope. And that's Joyce Hall created that, Hall as in Hallmark. And that is, in fact, the first folded Christmas card. So we have Christmas trees and Christmas cards, and these things are happening in a kind of organic, up from the people way, somewhat disorganized. And then, of course, it would have been the tradition of gift giving, which goes back, by the way, to the Roman Saturnalia, but it also goes back to the tradition of St. Nicholas that we'll talk about in the Christkind. And the Christmas gifts of that time were fairly modest. We do have here, probably the rocking horse would have been one of the more elaborate of the gifts, but dolls, the toys. And again, it's a home, it's a family thing, loosely associated with religion, but almost operating independent of its religious origins. And again, you'll see in this 19th century painting, the tree is on a tabletop. And the candles were not lit all the time, by the way. People wonder often, how did they burn the house down? Well, occasionally they did burn the house down, but the candles were lit only at specified times under, as I would have said, adult supervision. Well, that's how the holiday comes to America. That's how it begins. But there are 5 people who can be said to have somehow taken all of these threads and strands that are kind of coming up from the people, trying to create a common national holiday that, regardless of political persuasion, one could unify around. And the 5 people who essentially did that are, you know, Ben, I turned the music down so we could talk over it. I may have turned it down too far, and now we're in the middle of it. We'll just have to live with it. Well, in any event, the 5 people who did that were Washington Irving and his Old Christmas, Clement Clark Moore in A Visit from St. Nicholas, Charles Dickens, he's not an American, but he was immensely popular in America, a German immigrant, Thomas Nast, who essentially created the American image of Santa Claus, and Sarah Josepha Hale, who was the editor of Godey's magazine. And I think we'll do a program on her sometime in the spring or summer. She is arguably one of the most important people of the 19th century that most of the people listening to this program have never heard of. I originally called her the Martha Stewart of the 19th century, but with all due respect to Martha Stewart, Sarah Josepha Hale was much more important and much more impactful on American culture. So let's take a look at what these 5 people did. Well, Dickens actually pulled the holiday back to its religious roots. And we're all familiar with A Christmas Carol, in which he turned it into not necessarily a holiday that they go to church in A Christmas Carol, if you remember, but a holiday that became about personal redemption through learning the benefit of Christian generosity and Christian charity, and that it's more important to care for others than to care for yourself. So that's Dickens's contribution, is to remind us of what the holiday is all about. It isn't just about having a good time. Sarah Josepha Hale, amongst many other things, in her Godey's Lady Book, which was the Martha Stewart Living, the Cosmopolitan, the Better Homes and Garden, you picked the name of the magazine. That was the women's magazine of the 19th century. She was the editor and primary author of that magazine month over month, and she became a champion of the notion of home as the fundamental anchor that held society together, that the role of woman was to hold society together, and that Christmas was a family celebration conducted in the home. And she became a champion of the Christmas tree as the symbol of Christmas. And you see this illustration from Godey's Ladies' Home magazine. And again, I'd point out that the tree is on top of the table. I don't know that many people, well, there are small trees, people have small trees. Washington Irving, I'm sure most Jeffersonians and most of the people who tune into our programs know who Washington Irving was, or at least basically. Of course, he's one of the founders, I guess you could say, in some ways, one of the originators of American literature, as opposed to simply Anglo-American or English literature, but as a distinct literature unto itself. He wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, Rip Van Winkle, etc. He's most famous for his Knickerbocker's History of New York, which we'll come back to in a moment. But his impact here is that Washington Irving, in a series of 5 stories, Christmas, the Stagecoach, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, the Christmas Dinner, he describes an old-fashioned country Christmas that is a Christmas of generosity to the poor, the singing of carols, feasting, dancing, the hanging of mistletoe. His main character is a Mr. Bracebridge, who is an Englishman. Washington Irving saw all of this on a trip to England in the south of England. And the conceit of the stories is that Irving is a guest of Mr. Bracebridge, that he met him at a Stagecoach Inn, and Mr. Bracebridge invited him to spend Christmas with his family. Bracebridge is describing the way Christmas was celebrated in Old England, and Irving saw that and brought it to America. And so just about every custom you can think of that Americans use when they celebrate Christmas, Washington Irving brought to America in these stories, Old Christmas. He essentially, in many ways, invented or outlined the basic way Americans celebrate Christmas, including the mistletoe, which he brought. And of course, mistletoe is a vine that grows in deciduous trees. It stays green all year, hence it becomes a symbol of life. It gets confused at sometimes with holly. Why is holly a Christmas item. Holly's a Christmas item because it does get confused with mistletoe. The mistletoe was thought to be a symbol of fertility because it stays green. Holly was thought to be a symbol of purity because its sharp edges fends off evil spirits. All of this comes from our Celtic origins, our ancestors in the Druidic custom. And the custom of kissing under a mistletoe is actually a very tamed down, domesticated version of what, according to legend, occurred in not antiquity, this would be pre-antiquity in pagan times, in which in the midst of winter, beneath the mistletoe, people would have, how to say this delicately, made love. The kissing under the mistletoe is a highly domesticated remnant or artifact, if you want to use a fancier word, of that tradition. But back to Washington Irving and Irving's Old New York. And his Knickerbocker's History of New York, he tells the tales of Sinterklaas. And Sinterklaas had a wagon pulled by a horse, and he brought gifts to children, either on December 6th, which is the feast of St. Nicholas, or on Christmas Eve, but mostly on December 6th, the feast of St. Nicholas. Well, who was St. Nicholas? St. Nicholas actually existed. He was the Bishop of Myra in the 4th century, right around the time of the founding of the Feast of the Nativity, by the way. And he was legendary in his own time for generosity to the poor and to children. In fact, his generosity to the poor and to children was so great that he was actually beatified as a symbol of that. Throughout much of medieval Europe, the Feast of St. Nicholas, which is December 6th, was the major gift-giving day in the annual cycle of holidays. And of course, St. Nicholas was a bishop, and a bishop's robes are red, which is why Santa Claus's robes are red. And so when we go back to why are the colors red and green, it's because Santa Claus was based on a real bishop. Bishops wear red, and green is the symbol of fertility and everlasting life. The word Sinterklaas is a Dutch dialect mispronunciation of St. Nicholas. And that's important because Santa Claus comes to America not through anything Anglican or Spanish, but through the Dutch legacy of the earliest settlement of what became New York, and the Dutch called it New Amsterdam. And that's what Washington Irving is talking about in his tales, his old Knickerbocker tales. And the first actual recorded notion of the mention of Santa Claus, where the phrase Sinterklaas, you'll see there, has actually become Santa Claus, is a poem called Old Santa Claus that appeared in Albany, New York, sometime around 1820. No one's quite sure who wrote it. The suspicion is that Clement Clark Moore wrote it anonymously, but there is no real verification of that. But it is the first poem. It comes out of the Hudson River Valley, somewhere between Manhattan and Albany, and it's Old Santa Claus, and it talks about old Santa Claus with much delight, his reindeer. Now he has reindeer, not a horse. Remember, Santa Claus had a wagon and a horse. Santa Claus has a sleigh and reindeer. Old Santa Claus with much delight, his reindeer drives this frosty night, ere chimney tops and tracts of snow to bring his yearly gifts to you. And what did he do? He put gifts in children's stockings in their bedroom. Because though many houses he has seen in various in beds and stockings seen, some white as snow and neatly mended, others that seem for pigs intended. Because Santa Claus also left, if you were bad, left a long black birchen rod, such as dread the command of God directs a parents had to use when virtue's path his sons refute. So Santa Claus was already watching out on whether you were naughty or nice. And that's old Santa Claus. So you have the tradition of the gift giver and his sidekick, that Santa Claus was kind of dual. He was a good guy, but he wasn't naive. And of course, the gift giver and his sidekick in Europe, particularly in Germanic culture, is Christkind, which means in German, the Christ child. And the Christkind is the great gift giver. Sometimes an L was added to it. So you had Christkindl, which over time gets anglicized and morphs into Kris Kringle. But notice he still has red on, the bishop's colors. At other places, he was called Father Christmas, and you notice he has green on. So green and red are there. But Father Christmas had a sidekick, not unlike old Santa Claus leaving Birch and Robs, and his sidekick was Grampus. And if you were naughty, not nice, Grampus would come and he had birch rods to discipline you with. In any event, that's all of the background to that. All of that, however, then gets Americanized and domesticated in Clement Clarke Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas, which is the actual title of the poem, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." And Clement Clarke Moore was a New Yorker, lived in New York City, actually was a professor of theology. And actually his family owned most of Manhattan that became, in modern day Manhattan, the Chelsea area. That was their farm. And as New York City grew, Clement Clarke Moore and his family made a fortune from that. But in any event, he wrote in 1823 and published A Visit from St. Nicholas. And everyone, I suspect, knows this poem. It is the genesis of the American notion of Santa Claus, where Clement Clarke Moore has taken the tradition of Chris Kint, Kris Kringle, Sinterklaas and his wagon, and transformed it into what has now become the American notion of Santa Claus. 'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in the hopes that St. Nicholas, notice, St. Nicholas would soon be there. When to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be St. Nick, because it's Clement Clarke Moore who names the reindeer. So we've gone from 1 horse to 8 reindeer. And he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. And of course, it was Clement Clarke Moore, although there was in the Dutch tradition that Santa Claus came down the chimney. And I know a lot of people, I know children often ask, how did he get down? Well, in modern houses, Santa's not coming down the chimney. But in older homes, the hearth was immense and the chimney was immense. And it was actually possible to go up and down it. In any event, that's beside the point. You'll notice he comes down the chimney, he has a sack of toys, and he's in red. And his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot, a bundle of toys he had flung on his back. And he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. And then, of course, he's off with his sleigh. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team, gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, Happy Christmas. Notice it's Happy Christmas, not Merry Christmas. Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. And so Dickens reminds us, and he does it brilliantly without dragging you into church, that the whole point of the holiday is actually Christian generosity. Sarah Josepha Hale told you it was not only about Christian generosity, but it was about home and the sanctity of home. And she didn't bring the Christmas tree, but she became the champion of the Christmas tree as the icon or the symbol around which the family gathered to celebrate Christmas. Washington Irving gave us all of the customs that he adapted from what he saw in Southern England in his Old Christmas and in his Knickerbocker Tales. And in his Knickerbocker Tales, he talked about Sinterklaas in his wagon. Clement Clarke Moore upped the ante. Now Sinterklaas is Santa Claus. He doesn't have a wagon. He has a sleigh, and he has 8 tiny reindeer who guide his sleigh. And the image of Santa Claus then gets solidified, or crystallized might be a better word, in the 19th century, when German immigrant Thomas Nast, who was the great political cartoonist of the 19th century, he gave the Republican Party their symbol of the elephant, and he was, of course, the great satirist of Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall. But he also brought the German notion of the Christkind and of Santa Claus or Sinterklaas and St. Nicholas to America, and he created the images that we associate with Santa Claus. If you close your eyes and picture Santa Claus, you are picturing the creation of Thomas Nast, and that is Thomas Nast in the middle. He created the notion of Santa's works at the North Pole, and there's Santa with his spyglasses checking if you're naughty or nice. Santa decorating a Christmas tree. Santa making toys, relaxing after a hard day's night. He's checking his book to see if over here, if you actually are naughty or nice or deserve a present. And then, of course, he's here seen in a home, putting presents in the stockings. And that was the creation of Thomas Nast in Harper's Weekly. And the images, these are all Thomas Nast images of what Santa Claus looked like. And this one over here in the lower right-hand corner is, of course, the iconic one. The white beard, the pipe, the sack of toys, the red dress. And that is a Thomas Nast creation, which then over the next 100 years morphs into the Coca-Cola Chris Santa Claus as the archetypal image of the American Santa Claus. So that is actually the genesis and how the American way of Christmas evolved in the early and middle 19th century. And now let's take a look at.
And you better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town, Santa Claus is coming to town, Santa Claus is coming to town.
And one of the things everyone loves about Christmas, besides Santa Claus, as we've just discovered, and Christmas trees and Christmas gifts, is Christmas music. And let's take a brief look at Christmas music. And the book notes, I think today, number 3 of 4 book notes on the, I'm not going to say the history of Christmas music, but a kind of a survey of the American custom of Christmas caroling and where it came from. You can find those on the Jefferson's website.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful.
Well, let's take a look
And
at
since we've
some of the
no place
iconic
to go,
American Christmas
let it snow, let it
teaser
snow, let it snow.
for both the book notes and as a way of drawing this to a conclusion. For a longer version of it, you can go to WQLN's website. It's where all of the American Tapestry programs are listed under American Tapestry. It's episode 17 is A Caroling We Will Go. Or you can go to the Jefferson website and look for book notes, and you'll discover, well, there's only 2 there now. I think the 3rd one came out about an hour or 2 ago, and the 4th one will come out next week. Going over, but what about Christmas carols? Carols and caroling's origins. What is a Christmas carol? A carol, whether it's of Christmas or not, is a song of joy. Historically, it was a song of joy sang while dancing in a circle. Comes from the French word carol with an E after it. But the tradition of caroling, going door to door singing, interestingly enough, as we discovered last month in looking at the history of Halloween and Thanksgiving, has something similar to the way Halloween trick-or-treating was emerged. And you would go door to door looking for treats. Well, that by the Middle Ages became a custom that was associated with the mummers, who would go about town singing and stopping and expecting to be given gifts. And that tradition, by the way, has sustained itself into the 21st century. And you can go to the Mummers Parade on New Year's Day in Philadelphia. Well, that caroling tradition of going door to door, of course, gives rise to going a wassailing, in which in the Middle Ages and the early modern era, people would sing on the public square, and then they would go door to door asking for a drink or offering a drink or exchanging drinks. And so the idea of caroling, going door to door, wassailing in search of a drink or offering a drink, public singing in the public square, that comes down through the Middle Ages into the late modern, into today. To today, you see it has been much like the mistletoe, somewhat domesticated. No one's walking around with an open container looking for drinks or offering drinks, but that's where the tradition of caroling comes from. Early American Christmas carols, the earliest ones date from that same period of time that we were looking at trees and gifts and Washington Irving, etc. And that was in O Little Town of Bethlehem, which was written in 1867 by Philip Brooke, or I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day, which Longfellow wrote in 1863. Or actually, an interesting one is that everybody knows. I know everyone knows O Little Town of Bethlehem. I suspect most people know I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day, but I'm absolutely positive everybody knows Jingle Bells and can probably actually sing the first verse. But what most people don't know is that Jingle Bells was not written as a Christmas song. In fact, Christmas or the Christmas season is not mentioned in it. Jingle Bells was written in 1863 by, of all people, J.P. Morgan's uncle, John Pierpont. And it was written actually as a drinking song to accompany sleigh racing in Medford, Massachusetts. And sleigh racing was exactly what it sounds like, as you can see in the image behind the screen. You're dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, o'er the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtail ring. Well, the bobtail is the horse's tail, and there's a bell on it. That's where it comes from, making spirits bright, what fun it is to ride. Everyone knows those verses. Most people don't know the rest of the verses, which, by the way, I heard this afternoon through a complete fluke running some errands, a Johnny Mercer version of Jingle Bells in which they sang the whole thing. I got to go find that. But the real jingle, the lengthy original version was about drinking, being out with girls, and 19th century version of drag racing in sleighs. A day or two ago, I thought I'd take a ride, and soon Miss Fanny Bright was seated by my side. The horse was lean and lank, misfortune seemed his lot. He got into a drifted bank, and then we got upsot. Upsot is a pun on upset. The sot is slyly insinuating that they probably had too much to drink. He continues, a day or two ago, the story I must tell, I went out on the snow and on my back I fell. And then he says, now the ground is white, go it while you're young, take the girls tonight and sing this sleighing song. And that's where Jingle Bells came from originally. It has nothing to do with Christmas, never mentions Christmas, but over the last century and a half, it has become the archetypal children's Christmas song. And everybody, I think, knows Jingle Bells.
Bobtail ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight.
Jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh.
What's interesting about Jingle Bells, just to go back for a minute, is it speaks to the midwinter festival part of the Christmas season. Obviously, not the religious part. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, we looked at that in a book notes a year ago. You can find on the Jefferson website. Rudolph becomes the 9th reindeer. It was created as an advertising ploy by Montgomery Ward in the 1930s. They every year would come up with a Christmas poem for children that they would publish, and this is a copy, this is the cover of the original version, that they would publish in a nice little booklet that they would hand out to children in their flagship store in Chicago. And in 1935 or so, they asked Robert May, this is Robert May with his daughter, who was an advertising copywriter. Robert May wrote Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and it has an interesting backstory because Robert May is Jewish, and he always felt himself as the odd man out, somewhat the outcast. And Rudolph, of course, is the odd man out and the outcast. But because it's foggy, he has this magical nose that's red. It ends up that Rudolph leads the sleigh. And
You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen.
and the classic
Comet
version
and
is
Cupid and
Gene
Donner
Autry's.
and Blitzen. But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all?
Well, that's Gene Autry in the classic version of it. There is actually a nice Christmas story behind Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. In the middle 1940s, the Montgomery Ward owned all the copyrights to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and it had already become such a cultural, it just became a cultural phenomenon and a touchstone of Christmas in America. And in a rather unusual or a rare instance of corporate generosity, the CEO of Montgomery Ward gave Robert May all the all rights to it. May then had his brother-in-law, Johnny Marks, who was a songwriter, actually a member of the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Johnny Marks then composed the music for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And Johnny Marks is interesting because
have a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year.
Johnny Marks is interesting because he's symbolic of another thing. Many of the iconic Christmas songs, the festive Christmas songs, were interestingly enough written by Jewish American musicians and artists. Johnny Marks, that's him. He wrote Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree. He wrote Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He wrote the music to I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. He wrote A Holly Jolly Christmas. We heard Nat King Cole's. It was actually fairly tuned down early. You might not have heard it as clearly as I would have liked, which I think of as the classic Christmas song, was written by Mel Torme and Robert Wells. Let It Snow was written by Jules Stein and Sammy Kahn. It's an interesting phenomenon. We looked at that, I think, in the second of the book notes on Christmas caroling. Probably the most famous of all Christmas carols was also written by a Jewish artist, Irving Berlin. He wrote White Christmas for the 1942 film. Well, he didn't write it for the 1942 film Holiday Inn. It's thought that he had actually written it several years earlier and just had it in his files, so to speak. But it became famous when Bing Crosby sang it for the first time on Christmas Day, 1941. And White Christmas has an interesting backstory. It is arguably the only, or one of the very few Christmas songs that's actually sad, in which someone is away from home, yearning to be at home. As we said earlier, Christmas is the archetypal home holiday that is celebrated at home, and he's yearning to be at home and dreaming of a white Christmas. It became famous in 1942's Holiday Inn, which is a Bing Crosby, Fred Astaire musical. The basic conceit of which is so Crosby opens up an inn in Connecticut that on every one of the major holidays of the year, they have a song and dance review for which there's a song. Actually, Berlin thought the big hit would have been the one they wrote for Valentine's Day, Be Careful, It's My Heart. He was kind of surprised that White Christmas became the big hit. It was actually in the movie itself, incidental music, but it did win Berlin's only Oscar in 1942 for Holiday Inn and White Christmas, which Crosby, knowing a winner when he saw it, reprised in 1954's White Christmas. But White Christmas is the iconic Christmas song, and part of its sadness, besides the fact it was first performed by Crosby on December 25th, 1941, 2 weeks, not 2 weeks to the day, but 7, 14, a little more than 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, in which everyone, it was a season of gloom in which everyone intuited the coming storm. Also, it's a song of sadness for Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin obviously is not Christian, he was Jewish, but Irving Berlin's 3-week-old infant son died on December 25th, 1928. And every Christmas Day thereafter, Irving Berlin and his wife placed flowers on that child's grave. So White Christmas, which has become the iconic song, actually has a complex background. It is the biggest selling single record of all time, over 100 million copies sold. Bing Crosby's iconic version itself has sold 30 million.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know.
Although it is the #1 selling single of all time, it is not the most popular Christmas song today. The most popular Christmas song today, in terms of downloads on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Google, etc., is Mariah Carey's In any event, I'm looking at the clock. That is a brief history of how Christmas got to be celebrated on December 25th. I admittedly jumped over literally a millennium and a half, as we did not explore Christmas in Europe. But that is how Christmas came to America. And the interesting point in conclusion is that, well, it would be wrong to say Christmas was a created holiday because it was emerging organically out of the culture. It was a holiday that national leaders, Washington Irving, Clement Clark Moore, Sarah Josepha Hale, and others, saw as something that could bind together this new country in a common culture. And they created a midwinter seasonal festival of celebrating home and family, in which Christmas becomes the ultimate expression of home and family. And so, this argument about Is it Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays? It's both. And it goes back to the origins. There's always been these two things that maybe are an odd couple. I don't think they're necessarily an odd couple, because both the religious feast of Christmas and the, for lack of a better word, the festive celebration of Christmas are both celebrations of life and hope for the future. And that is actually how we got to the American way of Christmas.
Dr. Roth, another great installment. Many thanks to you for that, and many thanks to the music along the way, which I heard just fine. So I'm hoping the viewers at home can also hear that just fine. So a big thank you to you for that. Coming out of that, I've got to ask, because I think I got hung up on thinking about the Christmas trees and how they used to be on tables, and now the enormity of how big they are. And that immediately drew me to National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, in which Clark heads out with his family to get the biggest tree he can find. And that's going to be the Griswold family Christmas tree. And I can't help but think about movies. So fun, easy question to start with. What's your favorite Christmas movie that you turn to at this time of year?
Wow, my favorite Christmas movie. I think probably, I do like the White Christmas version, not the original Happy Holiday Inn. I watched Holiday Inn again a couple of weeks ago, and there's a couple of things in it that I had, a couple of clunkers in it that I had forgotten were in it. I haven't watched it for a while. I do like, as everybody else does, It's a Wonderful Life, which again, actually marries both of the themes. This is about family and home and community, and obviously there's a religious overtone, but the main thrust is it's about family and home. You know, and speaking of It's a Wonderful Life, I didn't mention it in this. I did, I think, when we did this presentation live at one of the Jefferson's offsites. I think I mentioned it in Corey. An interesting question, and I don't know if anybody asked, why are all of the images of Christmas winter?
It's a great question, and I know you're asking that on a day where in Erie, Pennsylvania, it's darn near 70 degrees. There is no snow on the ground, and you know, I think some are delighting in that. But I think that for those dreaming of a white Christmas, we're wondering when it's going to show up. But yeah, it's always winter. There's always snow. Those are the images.
Well, the way in which we celebrate Christmas is essentially derived from the Northern European way of celebrating Christmas. It's essentially German and then Nordic. Particularly, I don't mean to drive anyone crazy, but the British Isles. But it's also an example of, if you notice the dates when they were trying to make Christmas the national holiday, it's the middle of the 19th century. They're trying to create a common culture, and that culture got ripped apart by a civil war over slavery. After the Civil War, as they tried to put the culture back together again, the triumphant North was really calling, no pun intended, all the tunes. And one of the things, as Sarah Josepha Hale would have had a major role in this, interestingly enough, but so would Thomas Nast and some others, the image became that of the triumphant North, and essentially the image of New Englanders, the people who at that time, you know, I'm old enough to remember when the Northeastern elite still dominated American politics. That is all shifted south and west now. But the New England elite, and they were the ones trying to put the culture back together. And their notion of Christmas is it snows in New England in December. And so it's Christmas. So all of those images are images of winter. And as I was looking at all of those images, putting this together in the last month and a half or whenever, I was struck by something that ties into your comment about it's 70 in Erie today. I'm not going to get into the controversy of climate change. Something is happening. I don't pretend to be able to explain what, but the evidence is starting to get to be hard to ignore unless you just want to be an ostrich. But all of those images, all of them, it's winter.
It is, and I think maybe that's part of the we have something to look forward to in the depths of our winter, at least when we're mentally thinking about winter and we're thinking about how we are closing one year and beginning the next, and we have something to look forward to celebrate years and then launch into the next year. One of the things we've talked a lot about in this series is the mixing of the profound and the banal. And I was wondering, and I'm sorry I'm hung up on Christmas movies here, but I tend to think of, because one of my favorites is Elf. I love that movie, and I love the role that they use the sleigh for. In that the sleigh is, of course, driven by the reindeer, but it's powered by the belief in Santa Claus. That's what endows the reindeer with their ability to fly. Sorry if I'm ruining the movie for anybody. It's not important that I've spoiled that for you. It's still a delightful movie, and you should watch it. But one of the things that I found interesting, and they note this in the movie, is they actually upgrade the sleigh and they install this rocket on it, the Kinderklaas 3000 or something, to help it fly, because the belief is down. And of course, you might see where I'm going and maybe where the movie goes of restoring some sort of belief in Santa Claus. I wanted to ask you the idea of believing in this thing, because we as we grow up, when we're so young, we're taught to believe in this myth of this person and this idea, and to believe in it only to then deepen our understanding and become more aware of reality and then the role it plays in that. But the belief in Saint Nick, who's a real person who's now become something more, we've mythologized that person, the role of that in the mixing of the banal and the profound, how do you see that playing out in Santa Claus?
Well, actually, the belief in Santa Claus, and while you were saying that, I've thought of a major omission that I need to add to this program if I ever do it again. And that, of course, is the newspaper editorial, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus," which the actual editorial, and I don't have it at my fingertips, so I don't want to misquote it, but the sense of the editorial is, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. It's the spirit of generosity. It's the spirit of caring." And I think that's what the great charm, the great beauty of Christmas is, and it mingles the profound. The profound is this sense of generosity, this sense of caring. That's what Charles Dickens did in A Christmas Carol. That this isn't about receiving gifts, it's about giving gifts. It's about treating others as you would have them treat you. And so you have these profound values of family, of home, of communal sharing, and then all of that, and then you have the banal, all of the things we think of that go along with Christmas. In many ways, the creation of Christmas, not just the American way of Christmas, the creation, because Christmas is a global phenomena, even in non-Christian countries, interestingly enough, not in quite the same way it is here, obviously, is I think the great thing about Christmas is it does combine the banal, but it also combines it with the profound. And it is a time of peace. And it's a powerful metaphor for peace that unfortunately we frequently do not live up to.
And I can't help but think, and this is pun fully intended, it's baked right into it. And that's one of the things I was curious whether you touch on it, whether you know about it. And I say baked into it because I think that one of the things to me that's remarkable about Christmas is the transition of one's own self-development, that as a child, we're mostly excited about getting the gifts, right? We want to wake up in the morning and unwrap the presents and see that everything's been delivered. And I can't help bringing it back to movies, thinking of A Christmas Story, and Ralphie is so excited about the Red Ryder BB gun. It's the one thing that he wants and desires most. And, it's the whole movie and story is the quest for him to get that. And that's the story told through the lens of a child wanting something. And then at some point, and perhaps we happen upon it at different parts of our own development, it becomes more about the giving than the receiving. And then, as we mature and age, we think more about the gifts we can give rather than the gifts we receive. But I think that even as a child, though, we're sort of taught that at an early age. And this is back to the baked in, because children leave cookies and milk out for Saint Nick to feed him, to nourish him, then to leave something for him along for his journey. In any of your research, did you find where the idea that we must leave milk and cookies for Santa became part of the culture and the celebration and the habits that we see emerge during Christmas?
I think it's in Old Santa Claus, that original poem. And also, I think it was part of the Dutch tradition and with Sinterklaas. And you will also find it with the Christkind in European culture. You know, and I had
sorry,
a
go
thought
ahead,
a
Andy.
minute ago, and it's gotten away from me. Yeah, you know, Christmas is almost the perfect holiday if you think about it.
So what's your criteria for perfect? Because I immediately wanted to say yes, I agree with you, and I thought of my own reasons. But what's your criteria for perfect?
It brings people together. It's forgiving. It's transcendent. It's sharing. It's familial. It's communal. There is the naughty or nice, but it's not really judgmental, because there's this element that even though you've been naughty, will bring you into the group. It's unifying. Now, there are some people who would say it's divisive, and it would be interesting to me to know more about what non-Christians, particularly in the United States, which is an overwhelming Christian country, in its cultural heritage. It's not, it is also religiously pluralistic, as we know. So people who were not necessarily Christian, I'm wondering, they may disagree with me, perhaps even strongly, but I think one of the things is, and that gets into the Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, that somehow Christmas has transcended that religious divide, and the festive, familial, communal, sharing part, everybody wants in some ways to be a part of, and it's become so amorphous it can pull everyone in. And that's why I think this whole baloney about a war on Christmas, and it's greatly iron. It's good. Well, I don't want to get into that at the end of this program. We don't have enough time to explore that. There is actually a tremendous irony there, because a lot of the people, well, whatever. We don't want to get into that at this point. It's too big a topic. But I think it is the one holiday it pulls everyone together.
What I to that point, I think it's, you know, and back to what you talked about at the end and what we see on the slide right now, you know, thank you, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, that this is a holiday that's yes and, you know,
Yeah.
and that it truly is a duality. It's both, and it's not that we're in any way removing Christ from Christmas
Oh,
if
not at
people are
all.
celebrating in a Christian fashion. But we're using pop culture and in how we now celebrate Santa to really then look at the same sort of things I think the Christ story tries to teach us and tries to help us become better humans ultimately. And I think back to, like you said, non-judgmental, naughty and nice list. Like, there are ways that this is baked in to help us try to be better people and inspire us to do more good ultimately with our time here, and that, you know, the better we do, maybe perhaps more rewarded. And that's maybe a, you know, an oversimplification of we perform better when there's a carrot at the end of the stick and we're not being beaten with the stick and
Yeah.
Krampus is not
And-
getting
and-
us. But I think it's the yes and, you know, you get both.
And that's the thing, as I got into doing this research on the history of Christmas, that really struck me, that this notion of a war on Christmas is just a red herring. That Christmas has always been a holiday that combined both the sacred and the profane. I'm not even sure it's profane, but in the strict sense of the word, it's always combined the religious and the secular. It is a religious feast day that overlaps with, has become so entwined with, you can now not untangle the religious feast day from the midwinter celebration of life that is ancient. You know, the midwinter celebration of life is older than the Christian holiday. I mean, older by millennia.
Right,
So-
and that's I was gonna say too. I agree with all of the reasons you laid out. That, you know, this is, if we were to declare a perfect holiday and accomplishing a goal to unite us in celebration around the common objects of our love, its placement in the calendar year is I think not to go understated or underappreciated. That, you know, for most people it's the closing out of something. It's the,
Right.
you know, the finale that we've been marching
And the
toward.
beginning of something new.
Right, and so while we do have just a little bit of time here, I want to tease that new and just have you tell us just one little important, or maybe two important things that we should keep in mind that after Christmas, when we all turn our attention just a few days ahead, and we're getting champagne and we're gathering around and we're getting ready to sing Old Lang Syne, what should we keep in mind when we sing that tune?
Well, we didn't get into it because of the time allotment, and there is a book notes on for those who want to go to the
Which
website.
you can find at
Old Lang Syne,
jesserie.org.
Should We Forget the Old Times? And it is one of the greatest poems, songs in the English, maybe in any language, about the virtues of friendship, because it asks a rhetorical question. Should we forget old times? No. And the answer is no. We don't forget old times, and we don't forget the people who we shared with them, and we embrace them and we celebrate them and we move into the future with them. You know, old times should not be forgot. And that's exactly what Burns is talking about. It's a profound celebration of friendship and looking to the future, remembering the past, embracing those we care for, and moving into the future with them. Most people don't think of that when they're half-tuned with a glass of bubbly in their hand, singing on New Year's Eve, but that's what that song is about, which is why people have been singing it for over 250 years and will probably sing it for the next 250 years, even though they haven't got the faintest idea what the Scots dialect means. It's a great celebration of friendship.
In your explanation and your history, your knowledge all around that, we celebrate you, Dr. Andrew Roth. We really appreciate you taking the time to focus on these holidays, to give us some of the history, some of the pop culture, some of the profound behind all of this, to help us better understand ourselves. Excuse me, I'm terribly sorry. Better understand ourselves, better understand how we celebrate, how we come together, those common objects of our love. So, Dr. Andrew Roth, scholar in residence at the JES and host of the American Tapestry Project on WQLN Public Media, with episodes available on the NPR One app. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge with us here in this JES digital program.
And Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to you, Ben, and to all of our fellow Jeffersonians who are either watching it now or will look at it later on the web.
And of course, yes, a big thanks to all of you watching along at home, whether you're tuning in real time or you are streaming this on demand. Without you, these programs, the discussion and exchange and flow of information would not be possible. And of course, folks, as we approach the holiday season, we will be taking some time off here at the JES team, but you can keep up with all things JES current by heading over to our website, jeserie.org. There you'll find more information about upcoming programs. You'll find full videos of past presentations available to stream on demand, as well as publications that you can read, from essays to timely reports to that book notes series, where you can learn much more about Old Lang Syne and know exactly what you're singing, why you're singing it, and why you should keep singing it. So head to jeserie.org, and of course be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speg, and may your holidays be as merry and bright and as informative as they can be. Thank you for listening and learning with us.